So the show is called Thrown from the Storm. So can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I've been working on these paintings for about a little bit over a year now, and part of the idea of doing the paintings and creating them to begin with was to kind of find a way to tackle like conflict and energy and all this stuff together. And so when I started, I began with some drawings that were dealing with like fight cloud narratives and a way to kind of track or tackle all the different things that were happening all at once politically and socially and stuff like that. So when I put it together and I started working on the fight cloud, I was trying to place them into environments too, and they seemed like some kind of storm that was happening. And sometimes this was a social storm, the issues were social, or sometimes it was strictly political or socioeconomic or racial or class driven. And so as the drawing started to develop, the storms kind of developed too, and it was tackling all this stuff. But as I was working on this show, and especially for the body of work and the paintings that were in this show, I had started going through my head and thinking about these certain phrases that were coming up as I was building this body of work. And one of the things that kept coming up was this line from Rimbaud's poem, The Drunken Boat, which was thrown from the storm into a birdless sky, which is a poem that I really liked when I was 18 years old, but I hadn't read it in, 20 years because I'm 38 now. And so I went back and kind of was rereading the poem, and it was really neat how many similarities there were between the idea of the poem and the idea of the stuff that was going into the paintings and the drawings as I was making them. So I took the front part of that phrase and used it for the title, because with this we have things that are going into conflict of, the idea of these fight clouds and these nebulas. And I use nebulas because some of these are like space clouds and things like that too, or the idea of something that's not an earthly environment that's existed somewhere else, it's become its own thing kind of. But I use that kind of phrase because there's things that are existing in and things that are existing out, and things are being kind of kicked out. Where do they end up landing? Where ownership, takes place with that kind of stuff and those materials and those thoughts too. So the front part of that title is kind of a mix of thinking about all that stuff working together and trying to coexist.
Mm-hmm. So what's the full phrase? It's thrown from the storm.
Thrown from the storm into a birdless sky. Because it's written in French, it really depends on the translation you get, but that's kind of the gist of the translation. And one of the neat things about it too is that I remember when I was at that age reading that poem, I had it, and I had A Season in Hell, and really liking Rimbaud and really being attracted to A Season in Hell, which is just a fantastic poem. But reading A Drunken Boat and not quite, maybe not really quite old enough or lived enough or had enough responsibilities to kind of get all the nuances and really the layers about what the poem's about. So it was kind of neat, but I had read it and it was in there, it had stuck. But I remember at the time just thinking, oh, this is really nice, but it's not quite A Season in Hell. But it's kind of neat thinking about these paintings now, because there is an importance to that poem and like what the layers and the issues and the things that the poem's kind of addressing with identity and like thinking about yourself that's important to me now. So it's kind of like making the paintings got me in a way to go back to the poem and kind of think about the stuff now, because I'm in a very kind of similar situation, similar mindset with making the paintings and drawings that I think the poem addresses. So it was kind of neat that my 18-year-old self had planted something that just was kind of hibernating for 20 years later with kind of getting the revelation with that. And, none of the paintings or the pieces are illustrative of that concept. It's just kind of this cool coincidence that happened. But I think the idea and the examination where I have to get to mentally when I'm creating and thinking about making the work is very similar to the plight of Rimbaud's character in The Drunken Boat. Like they're together, so that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's personal, because you have like a lot of political symbolism, and it's a comment on culture, this series, so it sounds like it's a little bit more of a personal...
Well, it's a mix of both. I think everybody experiences what's going on politically and socially in a different way. Of course, being in a postmodern kind of context with how we experience things, everything's kind of determined by, like your age, gender, class, race, where you grew up, location, if you're American, if you're not American, if you vote this way, if you don't. So I think we all digest this information a little bit differently. What I'm trying to do is kind of just present it like, not so much what a stance is on any of this stuff, but the fact of what is the state of mind when all of this stuff is happening at once, and the anxiety and the tension that comes from just experiencing a multitude of all these kind of things that are coexisting, that are dealing with conflict at the same time, and that kind of overwhelming anxiety that happens of just existing. Now, there are certain things that get filtered out into the painting that I put in that are more kind of what I feel like would be something that I value more, just because it's going through me. Whereas if you were making the same body of work with your experiences and who you are, you know, some of the format might be similar. There might be things that are the same, but you might kind of, you know, have some of this stuff come out with what you select image-wise, or what your iconography is, or whatever you put on there. That would be a little bit more specific to you because it's being channeled through you. It's existed through you. So kind of digesting the same material and seeing how it comes out. You know, some of the things with you know, class and identity politics that, you know, deal with issues, you know, around the rebel flag and stuff like that. And yeah, West Tennessee in particular, you know, a lot of the addictions and things that people are getting arrested for and dealing with kind of how they digest their class, like pill prescription addiction and things like that. You know, some of that stuff might get filtered in, where if, you know, if you live somewhere else and your experience was something else, you know, you might attack these issues, but you might not have those kind of images coming out on the other side, if that makes sense. So that's where the personal part of it comes in. It's just, you know, certain things that I kind of spotlight or highlight with, you know, all those kind of qualities of who I am, you know, what I talked about before. So
yeah, and so for you, it's like definitely a southern lens on that.
Well, yeah, I think so. You know, I think there's certain things that I kind of just play around with. You know, the Southern culture is still a somewhat violent culture. It's kind of fixated on violence a little bit. You know, that's not a critique. That's just kind of how it is. It's just you know, especially where I'm from, West Tennessee, it's just kind of bred around being, you know, it's a tougher kind of thing. You know, I was always attracted to or just liked anyway. You know, any kind of like sense of what outlaw culture was. You know, everything from like cowboy movies to gangster flicks, but you know, that's just something that's just always was around. I remember I was like 18 and 19 doing a lot of fun paintings that were kind of these abstract cubist, but they were all about bar fights, you know, because we were 18 and 20, and like, you know, just there was a lot of bar fights in the town that we lived in. And so, like, you know, I don't want to just, you know, stereotype Southern cultures as it's just being violent, but I think I touch on some things that I think are uniquely kind of Southern. And the way that I try to paint and depict what I'm painting too is, you know, it's kind of loud, it's kind of aggressive, it's kind of bold, but it's also kind of vulnerable. But you know, if I had to describe the difference of, I think what, you know, a lot of Southern artists kind of focus on was when they asked me, well, what does that mean? What does Southern artists focus on? I was like, I'm not sure, but part of it has to do with like flavor, you know, just like the flavor and kind of something. So with the paintings being a little bit louder and like, you know, me paying attention, like kind of souping the color up and being a little bit more aggressive with the imagery. And you know, I think part of the violence in some of the paintings and the pieces are centered around this idea of like result-driven aggression. Like this kind of stuff happens, and it's not a slow, contemplative kind of existence. It's really kind of like blue-collar, aggressive kind of violence that kind of inserts itself with some of the issues that we're talking about. And so that could or cannot be Southern just for me. That's just kind of how I see it and how I think about it. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely more prevalent in the South, for sure, where it's just the violence is, at least, in my opinion.
Yeah, and part of our American history and identity too, I think, addresses that with, you know, just with what our history is. And, you know, the South is still a pretty beautiful, amazing place. I mean, I wouldn't live anywhere else, but I think we all approach part of our Southern history and our identity in very different ways. And, you know, I try to touch on what I think is this, sometimes these beautiful kind of like nuances and things that just kind of pop up that are nice, but, you know, too, just be aware that, you know, there is an aggressive side to Southern culture, and sometimes that aggression is demonstrated through violence, and that's part of it. It certainly has been in the last year anyway, I think, so.
Well, that way of looking at it, I think, definitely comes across in these paintings because of the color. I mean, you're depicting like violent things and pills, and there's like all sorts of, the Confederate flag is in here, like really like hot button issues, but they're also very attractive. So there's an attraction and a repulsion. So, I mean, I can definitely see see that going on in there just by looking at them.
Well, no, yeah, definitely. Well, and I think part of it too is when this stuff is reported or talked about is that, you know, the media, even with like bad issues, you know, if you watch the news or anything like that, like, you talk about something that's bad or terrible, production value on anything that you see now is just absolutely amazing. I mean, just technologically, we're so good at everything we do production-wise, and so when you're seeing like a really kind of like hotbed issue or something that's being talked about, you know, it's put together in this very kind of choreographed, you know, documented, you know, arranged, organized kind of segment that's almost, you know, it's almost cinematic. It's put together so well. So when you show this stuff, it's not really like how it would be 15 or 20 years ago where you're trying to like illustrate the truth and, you know, you see the person or the thing or the event, you're trying to depict it exactly how it was, because when you experience things like that, if you're not experiencing it in your own real life, and some of this stuff, you know, it's stuff that I've been around, that's how I'm painting, that's what I'm thinking about, but when you get, you're digesting this information from the news, the production value is so high, what you're really seeing is this kind of like commodified idea of what the thing is, and so, you know, there's an attractiveness to the commodity part of it that comes out through high production with how you get your information, how you get your news, that I think you have to be a little bit responsive to when you're making art or painting about it, you know, because otherwise you would just document it. You would, you know, like a photographer, where they would go and they want to document the scene, they take a picture, it's that time, it's that place, and there's no kind of production that's put around it. Whereas if you're getting it, you're digesting it, you're sitting on it, you're removed from that place or that experience. So what you're really painting is this kind of abstraction of the truth that's been passed down from this really overproduced kind of way of delivering information. And so I think that part of the artificial nature of that and like making it over attractive and stuff like that is just being responsive to how we get information now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just all the fiction that we have, like the entertainment and the film industry and everything, it's all the same stuff that's actually going on, but it's entertainment, so there's not like really a line between the two.
Yeah, that's a great issue. That's it's something that I'm really just starting to think about with these pieces too, and where they're kind of going next is exactly what you touched on is, you know, when does our truth become fiction, and what part of that fiction can you play with to where the fiction just erodes into fantasy. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it too, and this is kind of the idea with how the paintings are supposed to move around formally, is that there's so much spin. You know, I said I want the paintings to kind of spin physically around because there's so much spin in every bit of information that we get. So it's great if there's this kind of connection between the paintings physically spinning and moving the viewer around with all the stuff, because the truth and the thing that I'm talking about or discussing, it's constantly spinning around the same too. So I can see at some point where the spinning stops and maybe we get into some kind of like further erosion, which I think would be pretty neat too. You just made my next shot.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you brought a couple of drawings for this show, and I know that you told me earlier that that's kind of how you start for the paintings. You have drawings, and then you make a painting. But before is you start with drawings, and then you make a painting from those, and then through that painting come more drawings, and it just keeps going from there. So is there something that comes before the drawings? Like, do you make lists? Like, walk me through your plan.
You know, it's really funny because I guess one thing that I don't get to talk a lot about, but I got in a conversation with a couple of students the other day. It was about, you know, well, how do you get this kind of, how do you get your source imagery? Like, where are you pulling all this stuff from? And some of this stuff is stuff that's just persisted through a lot of the paintings I've done. I mean, it's just, you know, the rockets, the things that are kind of flying around, were still rockets and things that were flying around paintings. So some of these things have persisted. But I spend a lot of time when I'm in between making work too, gathering images. And this is a funny way to kind of work, but this is just what I've found works for me. As I spend a lot of time gathering images of things that I'm thinking about, that are things that I can't just make up from my head if I need to, like, you know, like a satellite or something like that, or you know, some of these different flags or oil derricks. So what I'll do is I'll spend a long time like looking at the images of them, and then I'll get rid of all my source material, so that when I'm drawing the stuff or I'm depicting the stuff, when I first start making the drawings, what I'm drawing is my recollection of what I think the image is. And so in that translation somewhere, I end up getting certain things wrong. But what happens is in that translation, I end up with these great kind of like awkward things of getting it wrong, to where it kind of ends up becoming the way I depict something, if that makes sense. It's like the way I draw like a flagpole, or the way I draw like an oil derrick, like I said, or one of these satellites. It's my idea of trying to remember what that image looks like. So certain things I get right and I get enough to kind of say it, but certain things I just can't recall because I'm away from the source images and I'm not trying to look at it and depict it or illustrate it anymore. And I like that kind of loose list or translation. So for me, the research component of kind of like how I even start before drawing, what I'm thinking about, comes from maybe some intuitive sketches, but also too is just going through and flipping through lots of different images of things and kind of finding the way that I want to say the thing that I'm doing in the painting. And part of it is too is in that process, you remember something with less and less detail. And so I know one of the things I want to do with this, because there was going to be so much stuff in the painting, was to find a way to visually strip down and simplify a lot of the objects that I was going to have in there, because I didn't want a lot of objects and then all those individual objects have a lot of complexity. And so doing this kind of process has allowed me to be able to put a lot of things in paintings, but find a way too to simplify the language down so where it's a quicker, faster kind of visual language, because the paintings are moving quick anyway. But it's talking and touching about a lot of stuff in a quicker, more simple way. So you're able, as a viewer, hopefully, to be able to see all this stuff and digest it because it's been simplified down a little bit. And I think we talked a little bit about emojis and other kinds of like communication, where there's almost this kind of through cell phone technology, computer technology, and social media. There's almost this kind of new form of what I call like pop hieroglyphics, where you can send all these real simple images out to people and they have context and they have meanings. And if that's the way that we're kind of like visually digesting things now, that it has to be faster, I still want to make complex paintings because I think there's complex issues that we're talking about. And I think there's an anxiety to dealing with all this stuff too. But when you do it, you can do it with a little bit more simplified kind of way of representing concrete images that people know, what they represent.
Yeah, the emoji thing, that's something that I didn't notice until I saw these in person, that all these little things, they look a lot like emojis, like the things that we have on our iPhone.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm so far behind technology-wise that, I had a flip phone for years, and there were kids in my class who would make fun of me. This one girl said to me once, she goes, "Oh, Mr. Stout, you have a flip phone. That's what we gave to my grandmother because she's dying." And I don't know what that means, but I was like, I didn't realize that I was that far behind. I mean, God, I still listen to CDs. But somebody had made that comment, and I'm not an emoji person. I don't send images of like smiley faces and hearts, and occasionally I will be sarcastic. But I wasn't aware of that component until somebody commented on like the third or fourth painting I'd done on this series. They're like, "Oh, these are really fun. They move really quick like emojis." And this was a younger person, 18 or 19, was a student I had in a painting class. And so when I heard that, I thought, well, that's something maybe to pay attention and think about. So, I'm not painting these. It's funny, it's kind of a new coincidence. I'm not painting these from emojis or anything like that, but I like the coincidence and the philosophy of being able to paint simpler images like we talked about through the process that work fast and that work speedy, kind of like the whole emoji kind of craze of like a fast, digestible image that says something. But it also says something, too, that can be open to interpretation depending on what the person or what the viewer is experiencing around them at the same time. And I think that makes some of this serious stuff a little bit more fun, too, So.
Yeah, and then we also talked about, these are all clouds, and there's the cloud, the big database. So then you have that, and that's really interesting that these all look like emojis moving in and out of what God knows what the cloud is. Yeah. That's the big joke, right? Yeah, what is the cloud? But it's funny how that worked because the idea of a flight cloud kind of evolving also to include this whole kind of like nebula space thing with information, energy expanding, attracting, and with all these issues, you notice too, it really works like a storm, is that anything that happens in our country that's a hotbed issue, it kind of builds, it rises, it's explosion. Sometimes it ends tragically and violently, and then it kind of just like a storm, it breaks up and dissipates, and it's not because the issue's over or that it's been solved, it's just because as a country, and a consumer-based country like we are in the United States, we've just digested it and moved on to something else that we need to consume. And sometimes it's the same cloud that pops up when we go through the same set of events, and then sometimes it's about some kind of completely other different issue.
But then too, you have all this leftover information that goes on with like covering that, details, interviews, behind the stories and all that stuff. And so the other concept is kind of, we joked about with not understanding the cloud. So if you can imagine how long I had a flip phone, you can imagine how long or how far behind I am in even conceiving of what the cloud is. But for me, as a technology, it seems like this kind of technological wonderland of like, there's all this information and it goes up in this place and it's stored in this, kind of metaphor technology, which is the cloud. And nobody really knows how it works. But you're not really sure if it's still there or if it can ever be completely erased. And I think this is kind of the way history works too. It's like how much do we remember, how much do we recall, how much is this important with how we dictate with how we live our lives, with how we govern, with how we parent, with how we love, with our friendships. And so I think it's interesting that there's this whole other kind of image-based idea around that might exist to where things can pop back out again or come back out that you think are gone. So it has a lot of interesting parallels in working with this format with how information is shared, stored, experienced, digested, consumed, and all that. So it's fun. It's definitely going into what I'm thinking about next with these two. So
yeah.
Is this the part where I get to ask the interviewer a question? Do we have one of those?
It's okay. You can do whatever you want.
Okay, so the overwhelming narcissistic artist question where they ask an interviewer something is, so Sibley, which of these paintings do you think is the strongest or that you connect to the most? Is there one in here that you really like? Jason, that's the one. Or is it, Jason, these are terrible, but I'll answer this question.
It's hard for me to say because you're using all the same symbols throughout different ones.
Mm-hmm.
So conceptually it's hard for me to pick a favorite, but I think visually this, I don't know if you can see it, but this tall vertical one right there, it's just, I guess because of the vertical format, but visually it just has this coming up out of something, I don't know.
Well,
it's much more explosive, I guess, in a weird way.
Well, sure it is. I think the funny thing about that one is this is the one out of all the paintings, it's the only one that I've done that's not square. Because part of the formal interest at the beginning was how do you move around things in the square and get it to turn around and do all this. But there was something about doing that one where I want to change the format and see if it could still move. And it didn't move the same, but what it offered was this idea of how to convert this information into doing a portrait to make it even subliminally a secondary kind of figurative thing because it's in more of a figurative kind of format. So I see myself trying to kind of tackle a little bit more of those two and deal with that. But,
yeah, it doesn't. These are all really visually active. Like you can see them like pulsing just from like the colors and the repetition, like optical illusion almost. But I think that one moves just in a different way. It's just an extended like stretching, whereas these kind of vibrate and spin like what you're saying.
yeah.
I might just be gravitating towards that one just because it's so different. It's like stop.
Yeah, it's really funny too because we might have talked about this, but I had this idea of to where part of what I like about this format is like how it's that you can do the whole kind of thing based on the cloud thing we're talking about, where you can gather this information and use that to structure and go through this type of question. So I even had this idea to convert these into like portraits of people, but to ask certain questions about how do you vote, where do you like to live, what are you scared of? So almost like this interview type thing, you do this and create a personal kind of information cloud just about that person, and then that's the portrait. The portrait is this cloud of all this stuff that comes out based on what their answers and responses are to that kind of stuff. So that's the first one I've done, and it's not from a form of any kind of questions. I really just wanted to see how that would move in a different format, but I can't escape the figurativeness of it. That it feels, the cloud in this one doesn't feel like a cloud hovering on this stuff. The cloud itself feels like a figure.
Yeah, it's almost like a word, like a
Yeah.
caterpillar.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, and it's, you got the road just coming in, and it just cools out.
Yeah.
So have you, because there's so many different cultural issues that you put in here that are all very different, but obviously like what we've been talking about, they're all connected and they're all coming from the same thing, and it's all just this one big information overload. But have you found any new connections between certain issues that you haven't seen before?
I think more than anything is that there's so many smoke screens for really talking, more than anything, is really addressing social class in our country. You know, everybody says it's, you know, one of the slogans you hear at the campaigning stuff is that, you know, it's about jobs, stupid, and that's the joke. And everybody throws out jobs, jobs, jobs. Mm-hmm. But nobody really throws out how certain class issues and the difference and the widening of the social classes really affects different parts of our culture, with how we react, with how we get along with each other, with how we think, you know, how education works and stuff like that. It just feels like the lower and the middle class are getting so far apart, and the fantasy, or I guess I should call it a fantasy now, maybe it's still attainable, but the thing that I always liked as a kid, and something that drove me, one of those like really conditional truths that was handed to me, is that the great thing about America is, you know, if you work hard, you know, and if you do the right thing and you just keep your head down and you keep plowing ahead, is that you can move up this ladder. And so you'll see in a lot of my paintings, I have these ladders that kind of go to nowhere, and they're kind of indicative of, you know, climbing social class ladders and working your way up. But the truth is that we don't all start on the same rung. Some of us start, you know, on the ground. Some of us start way beneath the ground. Some of us start on the 8th step of the ladder, on the 10-step ladder, and which means you can mess up and you can fall down, and you might fall down to the 4th step on the ladder, but you're still 4 steps higher than the person that started on the ground. And I think a lot of the class things that exist in this country that really separate us and divide us get smoke screened into so many other kind of issues that are just kind of these affronts that take our mind off that, or pull our attention away from that. Is that, you know, those are the things that we really need to address. And I don't want to, you know, go on too much about it. Sound like I mean some kind of like socialist practice or thing like that. But I just think it's scary that if we get away from that kind of initial philosophy of what our country was supposed to be, with having, you know, this, where the middle class was the transitional class, and that was the thing, is that you needed the middle class because you could move up and down on this. I always use the ladder analogy here, but that you can move up and down this ladder if you work hard, if you do the right thing, you connect yourself. And then, but if we take that middle away and there's only a bottom rung and there's a top rung, that means there's no climbing. And when you have no climbing and there's no ability to climb or to ascend and move up, I think that's when you end up getting social unrest and violence and, you know, racism and classism and all these other things that come out of this are conditions into that, but also too, they're conditions that are from that. And if we lose that flexibility, I just think that, you know, unfortunately there'll just be more tension and anxiety and all this other stuff too.
So formally, these are obviously narrative paintings, but they're very much abstraction. And one thing that I was really interested in was you were telling me that you, not necessarily like draw from abstract artists, but you see connections between your work and other like abstract artists. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think with, you know, for me personally, I mean, the paintings that I was interested in when I first started really looking at paintings were not representational paintings, were not even images. It was always semi-abstraction and pure abstraction. And as I got to graduate school, I was still interested in those two types of painting more than anything. And I think I even got pushed more into the non-objective abstract world even further, with just really finding out what you can do in a picture to make a picture or a painting work without any kind of subjectivity present. You know, what can color do, what can design do, what can soft edge versus hard edge do, and really what can you get out of a picture without being reliant on subjectivity, because I knew that I wanted to do narrative painting, but so much of narrative painting with figures and things that are recognizable are all based around this value system of the things that you're selecting to put in. And if you put in things that people like, there's going to be a certain response. And if you talk about certain issues, there's going to be a certain kind of response. But you're really dependent on subject matter. The beautiful thing about abstraction is that you're really dependent on what the painter's choices are, what they're paying attention to with color, form, composition, and things like that. And that if you can get something out of a composition without any kind of subjectivity that's a recognizable representational thing, and you can get something there, that's an asset and that's a strength. So the paintings that I was paying attention to were, non-representational, non-subjective, narrative type of paintings. Everything from Rothko to Sarah Morris, trying to think of other people, and then all the people that are kind of in between too. I like Carol Dunham. I think is a great picture maker. Someone that kind of plays around with expressionism a little bit, but with some figuration. I think Rothko is super important. Like I said, but also too on the other side of that is looking at where Rothko's kind of feather edge, soft abstraction confronts something like what Guston went through. I think Guston's kind of this great model to look at because Guston's kind of had this second and third and fourth run of Guston's big again. I just wish there was a committee that said let's just agree that Guston's great all the time and this is why he's great because one of the things I enjoy about Guston's work so much is if you look at the arc of his whole career, he started off with these recognizable images, somewhat representational, kind of worked his way to some semi-abstraction doing his WPA stuff, went into full abstraction, went into this void of full abstraction, did that for how many years? I don't even know, 20 I guess maybe, I always get the dates wrong. But then all of a sudden out of that void, these figures start coming back out. And I always thought about the great thing about Guston is Guston was a model for how to get yourself into a void of pure abstraction, but also how to work your way out of it and start making pictures again. But some of the best Guston pictures are the struggle between going into the void and then being on the other side of the abstract painting, his abstract work, when he first started coming out of the void. So where can you have, or how can you make pictures that have kind of a little bit of both, to where you're just enjoying making a painting that's doing things that would appeal to an abstract painting audience or people that value abstract painting, and where can you still combine that stuff and have it work in harmony with things that become images and narratives and scenes and stuff like that. And for me as an artist and as a painter, when I make drawings and paintings, those are kind of outside of the content I'm working with. Those are the formal responsibilities that I try to approach each time. That's what I'm thinking about.
So with other visual influences, I know we talked about graffiti or hip-hop. I know you said you don't really work from references, but you do use them at some point. Is there anything else?
Well, I can touch on that a little bit. Hip-hop's great because the speed of it, if we go back to that early question where we talked about being a Southern artist, one of the things about being a Southern artist too is we come from this oral tradition. We are storytellers, and unfortunately sometimes we're story makers. But the whole idea of myth and conflict and stuff like that, they're coming from a kind of narrative form. And so I like storytelling. I think pictures tell stories because I definitely have recognizable things in there. With these, I'm telling the story in a very kind of different way than I've ever told it before. But if I connect that to something else, the South has this great kind of hip-hop culture, with everything from Outkast and Mystical, all these different kind of, and what I like about that is the speed and kind of originality of a lot of these narratives too, but how it's kind of delivered in this kind of very poetic, stylized. Rap is very stylized when somebody has their own rapping style, but also too how they can touch on and hit so many issues and so many things at this kind of rapid pace, to where if you're trying to convert that information when you're hearing it into an image, it's a fast kind of snapshot, and it's put together and it's layered on top of each other. And so I think I'm not making these paintings based around that, but that's just part of our culture that I've always enjoyed, and I think some of that thinking somehow gets put into this stuff.